Hi, I'm Dr. Brannon, and in this video, you will learn about teaching students how to use word learning strategies to comprehend text. Let's review what we've learned about reading comprehension. In the simple view of reading, we learned that reading comprehension is the product of word recognition and language comprehension. Vocabulary, or knowledge of word meanings, is a component of language comprehension. So in this presentation, we are focusing on the language comprehension factor. Here we see the simple view of reading in more detail. We see the many strands that make up language comprehension and word recognition, and that ultimately lead to skilled reading. Vocabulary is one of the strands in the language comprehension side of the rope. In this video, we will look at the vocabulary strand of the language comprehension part of the rope. In the previous module, we learned about how to teach vocabulary directly, but since it is not possible to teach the meaning of all words to students, we have to equip them with strategies for figuring out word meanings on their own. So in this module, you will learn about some word learning strategies and how to teach them. Here we see the four-part processing model for word recognition. We already know that the model is made up of four processors, and that the phonological processor deals with sound, and the orthographic processor deals with symbols or letters. In this video, we will learn about the meaning and context processors and how they connect to word meanings. When a word is decoded, the meaning processor is used to determine the word's meaning. If the word has multiple meanings, the context processor is used to determine which meaning is being used within the particular context. This is where word learning strategies come in. They can aid students in using the context of a sentence to determine the meaning of the word. The National Reading Panel identified 3 word learning strategies as being effective for determining the meanings of unfamiliar words. These include using a dictionary, analyzing the morphemes in words, and analyzing the context of a sentence. These are the 3 strategies that we will focus on in this video. Although these strategies are important, teachers should not dedicate large amounts of time to teaching them. Graves, a reading researcher, suggests that students in middle grades spend 2 to 4 hours per week for 3 weeks when first learning about word learning strategies. The average amount of instructional time spent on teaching word learning strategies should be about 20 minutes per week for the entire school year. First, let's take a look at using a dictionary to determine a word's meaning. Here's some research about dictionary use. Jenkins and Dixon in 1983 contended that students can learn from looking up a word and fully processing its definition. McEwen and colleagues found that the more students are exposed to definitions, the better they learn words. Stahl and Nagy found that when students are able to use what they find in the dictionary, they are better able to translate the definitions into useful word knowledge. Here are the steps for teaching students how to use a dictionary. In step 1, you will need to explain to the students what strategy you are teaching them and why it is useful. Next, introduce and discuss some of the guidelines for using a dictionary. Here, you can see some sample guidelines that come from your textbook, the Teaching Reading Sourcebook. Step 2 is to model or demonstrate how to use the dictionary. Select a text with a word that is unfamiliar to your students and that has multiple meanings. Your textbook provides an example of the word pitch. As you demonstrate looking up the word, follow the guidelines for dictionary use that you introduced in step 1. In step 3, provide guided practice. Select a new text that contains the same word that you modeled looking up in step 2. Guide the students through following the guidelines and analyzing the dictionary definitions that were previously found to determine the meaning of the new word. Step 4 is an opportunity for students to practice using a dictionary on their own. Use the same text as before or a new text. Then select a new word. Have your students apply the guidelines for using a dictionary on their own to determine the meaning of the new word. Finally, extend their word use by having students keep track of the new words they have learned. Consider using a hotshot notebook as described in the Teaching Reading Sourcebook. Another teaching strategy for showing students how to use a dictionary to figure out unknown words is the PAVE strategy. PAVE stands for prediction, association, verification, and evaluation. It teaches students to use a dictionary to use context to predict a word's meaning, and then to verify the meaning in the dictionary. A PAVE map can be used for this procedure. This map can be found in the appendix of the Teaching Reading Sourcebook. Now let's transition to talking about the second word learning strategy, morpheme analysis. Morphemes are the smallest meaningful parts of words. For example, the word climb has only one morpheme because it only has one meaningful part. However, the word climber has two morphemes because it has two meaningful parts. The word climb, of course, means to climb, but when we add the suffix er, it changes the meaning of the word to someone who climbs. Another example is the word unstoppable. This word has three morphemes, un, stop, and able. And so we can use the meanings of each of these morphemes to understand the meaning of the words, which means unable to stop. Morphemes can be free or bound. Free morphemes, or base words, can stand alone as a word, whereas bound morphemes, including prefixes, roots, and suffixes, must have additional morphemes added to make a word. Here's some research about morphemic analysis. More than 60% of new words that readers encounter have relatively transparent morphological structure. That is, they can be broken down into meaningful parts. For every word a child learns, we estimate that there are an average of 1 to 3 additional related words that should also be understandable to the child. The exact number depending on how well the child is able to utilize context and morphology to include meaning. Some important things to consider about morphemes are: starting in 3rd grade, words with Greek and Latin roots form a large percentage of the words students encounter. Greek words are used in more specialized scientific language, such as astronaut. Latin roots are used in more general language, such as in the word dictate. Due to the many differences in morphemes, I will not provide specific steps for instruction in this video. However, the following teaching strategies are described in your textbook. Word families, such as collect, collecting, collection, and collector, or word part clues for prefixes, word part clues for suffixes, and word part clues for roots. Now let's transition to talking about the third word learning strategy, context analysis. Context analysis involves inferring the meaning of a word by scrutinizing the surrounding text. Research has found that teaching students how to use context clues enhances their vocabulary development. Here are the types of context clues that readers encounter in text. The table lists the type of context clue and an example. I have underlined the vocabulary word and represented the context clues in yellow. Let's take a look at each type. The first type is definition. So following the word, we have a definition. For example, a conga is a barrel-shaped drum. The keyword is signals the reader that the definition is coming next. Second, we have in a positive definition. For example, at night you can see constellations or groups of stars in the sky. The comma and the word or signal that an explanation of the term is following. The next type is a synonym. My dog Buck travels everywhere with me. My friend's canine buddy travels everywhere with him too. So we can use the clues from the second sentence, the second half of the second sentence, to determine that the word canine also refers to a dog, because in the first sentence we learned that the dog Buck travels with the person, and then in the second sentence, travels everywhere with him too signals the reader to understand that a canine is also a dog. The next type is an antonym. I thought the movie would be weird, but it turned out to be totally mundane. And so we can figure out the meaning of mundane because the word but tells us that it means the opposite of what we believed it would be in the beginning. So we thought it would be weird, but it turned out to be mundane or just ordinary. The next type is an example. For example, in science, we are studying marine mammals such as whales, dolphins, and porpoises. In this example, we have a comma and then the keywords such as, and so that signals the reader that examples are to follow. So we can use the clues whales, dolphins, and porpoises to understand the terms marine mammals. The final type is general. Einstein rode his bike everywhere. He thought driving a car was way too complicated. And so we can use some general clues from these two sentences to figure out what the word complicated means. If Einstein rode his bike everywhere because he thought the car was way too complicated, we can kind of infer that driving a car might have been more difficult because Einstein chose to ride his bike everywhere instead of driving a car. Here are some steps for directly teaching context clues to your students. First, start with a direct explanation. In this step, you'll need to explain the strategy and its purpose, and then demonstrate the strategy with a closed sentence by having students guess the missing word. For example, they just delivered the sausage and cheese blank that we ordered. We can use the clues from the text, sausage and cheese, and then that was something that we ordered to infer that the word would be a pizza. The second step is to model. Demonstrate using the context clues chart to teach the strategy. So you can use the context clues chart posted here, which is also in your textbook, to teach the strategy. So when you come across an unfamiliar word in your reading, number one, look for words or phrases that may be clues or hints to the word's meaning. Second, look for clues in the sentence that contains a word. Then, if you need to, look for clues in the sentences that come before or after. Next, using context clues, try to determine the meaning of the unfamiliar word. And finally, try out the meaning in the original sentence to check whether or not it makes sense. The third step is guided practice. So now together with the students, practice using the context clues chart to practice the strategy. So this part we are working on figuring out the meaning of a word together using context clues. And next we have independent practice. And so this is where you want to have students work in pairs or even individually to use the context clues chart to practice the strategy. Other strategies for teaching context clues include introducing the types of context clues that we reviewed earlier, applying the types of context clues, combining context clues with morphemic analysis, such as the vocabulary strategy that's described in your textbook. This is the worksheet provided by the Teaching Reading Sourcebook for teaching the vocabulary strategy. In this video, I provided an overview of 3 ways students can figure out the meanings of unfamiliar words when they are reading independently. These strategies include using a dictionary, morphemic analysis, and context clues.